Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of House to Home. I'm so excited for this episode. House to Home is a podcast brought to you by Family Policy Alliance Foundation, and my name is Grace Youngson. I'm usually here with my co-host Joseph Combe, but he couldn't join us today. But we have a very special guest, Representative Alyssa Brown from Arkansas. Thank you so much for coming on today, Alyssa.
Thank you, Grace. Excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, super excited. So, Alyssa is representative in Arkansas and pretty new to that role. And so I'm really excited to have a bit of a conversation about what led you into that, what's going on in Arkansas, and just open people's eyes to what it's like being a representative, especially in the crazy culture that we're in right now. So, Alyssa, would you share a little bit more about yourself and your journey to becoming a representative?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm so happy to be here with FPA, Family Policy Alliance, and your viewers because we are very like-minded, and it's refreshing as a state representative to be with those like-minded Christians who care about what's happening in our government, because that is a biblical mandate for us to care what's happening in our government and with our people. And so my journey to the legislature is a little unique, and I was full-time ministry for many years, actually born and raised in the district that I now represent, which is North Central Arkansas. It's District 41. Born and raised here in Heber Springs area. My parents have pastored here for a good bit, and I was in ministry, and like many people, COVID kind of really started getting me to look at what's happening in our political world and what our elected officials are doing, but mainly on the national scale, which is most people's kind of introduction to politics is looking at what's happening in DC. And long story short, I saw a flyer, a organization in Arkansas that I knew my church and my parents had supported, but I didn't really know much about, which was Arkansas Family Council was having an event called Pastor's Day at the Capitol. And my dad was unable to go. And so I went and represented our staff there at the Capitol. And I went to this event, and this was in early 2023, and the session had just started, and met the team and the staff. And long story short, they asked me to come join them and intern with them during that legislative session. They said, you can come back in 2 days and start with us on Monday. And I just knew it was the Lord opening a door. Sometimes you have a door that comes to you and you didn't even know to knock on it. And so, but you have that peace from the Lord that this was from him. And that's how I saw that opportunity. And so had to run to the store and get some blazers and some suits because I'd never been in this type of atmosphere before. Came back and got to learn from them and get to see what it's like to advocate for good social conservative policies and see what really happens at a state level. And that's when my eyes were kind of opened of, wait a second, we all are kind of talking about what's happening in DC, but really what the state legislatures do impact us the most as it pertains to taxes or other family issues. And so my eyes were open to that. And long story short, sped forward, and the Lord just kept burning a heart in me for government, to pray for our elected officials, to watch legislation, to advocate, especially as the next generation leader. And got introduced to Christians Engaged, which is now the ministry arm of FPA. And through that, there was a open house seat here in my district, and I met with the one person who had filed to run for the seat to pray over them and talk to them about why they ran for office, some of their worldviews and their policy positions. And it was through that conversation, Grace, that I realized, oh no, I cannot vote for this person. Tried to find somebody else to run when nobody else would run. In the last 20 minutes of filing period being open, as a 26-year-old who had never ran for office, I'm come running into the Capitol and I filed to run. And to say I was the underdog is an understatement. I mean, this person who I was running against had been in office longer than I had been alive. And the cards were definitely stacked against me. But I tell this story because I also want others to know that if I can do it, so can you. And so the cards were stacked against me, but I worked really hard and I watched as the Lord just put favor on my yes, on my obedience. Because when I filed to run, I said, I'm believing God for victory, but I'll trust him with whatever. But he's the one who really came on and put favor on it, knocked a ton of doors, used a lot of strategy, political strategy, didn't back away from talking about the hard issues, talking about being pro-life, talk about being what it means to advocate for women. And so won that election, had another election, won it, the general. And then we all just finished our first legislative session here in 2025 in Arkansas. We wrapped up around May. So from the 2-year time, I went from being in the gallery in 2023, watching the members of the House debate and talk about issues, to the next general session being on that floor with my name on a seat representing 32,000 Arkansans. And it's an incredible honor.
Wow, that's such an amazing story. I love the fact that both of us are younger, in our 20s, and able to be a part of this movement and make an impact in this space. And I think that I hope that any other younger people who are watching this, or if you're a parent, a grandparent, you should share this podcast with younger people who are interested in this kind of thing, because we need more young people in this movement. And what I love about your story, Alyssa, is, when you just step out in faith and follow God, even if it's the last 20 minutes, and then he just backs us up. And that's the great thing about our movement. We're on God's side. We're on the side of truth. We're on the winning side. And God is just asking each of us to follow what he's calling us to do. And he's going to back us up and ensure that we succeed. And so it's such an awesome story. Thank you so much for sharing that. I would love to hear some stories, some info about what are the kind of bills that have gone through or been voted on this session, and what really is going on in Arkansas right now.
Yeah, well, that was some great commentary right there, Grace, about we are fighting on the winning side. And so that kind of is my story going into the legislative session too. And for those listening who are not familiar, I mean, our state legislatures, we go from having an election in November, at least here in Arkansas. I'm not for sure how other states vary, but the election was in November in my general. And so I had an opponent then too. So I was, believing for victory in that. And I won in that election. And then a couple weeks later is like a quick week of orientation. And then we're getting sworn in at the beginning of January. And we gavel straight into session from there. And so when you're a new candidate, when you're a new elected official, that's not a lot of time to prepare. And I remember a pastor one time saying, your reward for conquering one battle is getting another one. And that's kind of how I felt going from these intense elections to now I have a session. And this is why you make it through and you work hard in those intense elections, is to actually do something with the seat and the authority you've been given. And it's a heavy burden, but it's a great honor. And so session started, and I knew there was a couple of areas I wanted to work on. I didn't know if I would necessarily be the one that got to carry these bills. And again, just the Lord's hand on it and his favor. I had the honor of carrying, being the House sponsor of a bill called Religious Rights in Public Schools Act, which we passed here. Our local family council group helped on that one. And like so many people are aware, but we know after the Kennedy versus Bremerton School District case a couple years ago that the Supreme Court has come out and said that they no longer use the secular lemon test to rule in issues of whether a display or a religious display is constitutional. And so with that ruling, that is a huge door open to so much legislation that we can do at a state level. So we know that Supreme Court no longer uses lemon. So what do they use? They use a longstanding history and tradition test. And so with the Religious Rights in Public School Act, what we basically wanted to do is codify what are some of those religious rights that our public school students and teachers have in school. And part of why we want to do that, number one, is to kind of demystify some of this fear mongering that you have to leave your Christian beliefs at the school gate in order to walk in. And so we codified some of those rights that were already there, but just giving clarity. And actually, a lot of school administrators who aren't necessarily social conservative Christians welcomed this legislation because they too wanted some clarity. And so super excited to see that bill pass. From what I'm aware, it's one of the only bills like it in the nation. And so I hope to see other schools now that other states now that lemon is no more. And then in that same vein, I wanted to sponsor this bill, but I didn't know if I would be able to. But I'd heard a little bug that there was a senator who was going to be doing the 10 Commandments bill, which we saw in Louisiana and Texas. And that was adding the 10 Commandments to what could be displayed in government buildings. In Arkansas, we wrote that a little differently. We actually amended our In God We Trust motto display act to include the 10 Commandments. And I was honored to get to be the House sponsor on that bill. So as a freshman legislator, you're still figuring out where the bathrooms are and where to go to committee, much less to carry big pieces of legislation like that. And so great honor to pass that bill. It's actually being held up in court right now, but we believe that we are going to win on a higher court, and we're going to eventually win on this legislation, because you cannot separate the history of our nation and the foundation of our law and justice system from the 10 Commandments. And I said it to some of my liberal colleagues, you don't have to agree with the 10 Commandments, but it's a part of our history. And our founding fathers referenced it in other nations too. And so we got that 10 Commandments bill passed here in Arkansas. Governor Sarah Sanders signed it later that spring, and we're believing for victory on it. And then the last bill I'd love to mention to you is a bill called the Restore Act. You referenced that we're both younger, and I filed to run for office when I was in my mid-20s. Now I'm in my later 20s, and there's a range of issues that we see within our generation that maybe some of the other generations didn't face. And that's why that diversity of age is so special in the legislature. And so as you probably are aware, Grace, and I don't know if our listeners are, but a lot of women today in their 20s and 30s struggle with infertility, or they struggle with these underlying reproductive issues like endometriosis or PCOS and hormonal imbalances that make life hard and difficult. And then when they do get to a season of wanting to start a family, they realize it's also hard to conceive, and that should not be the case. And I have so many people in my life and personally who have faced some of these issues. And so when I was presented with this bill that would give restorative reproductive medicine coverage to those women, or to women who they don't believe in some of the IVF industry practices, and so they need a more natural and holistic route to conceiving children or addressing these issues. And so the Restore Act, we introduced it here in Arkansas. We made lots of changes. It was kind of a dogfight to get it through. It was definitely the legislation that I spent the most time on. But I've already gotten some emails of some employees, state employees, and other people who are now able to schedule these surgeries for endometriosis, or schedule some of these procedures to really get to the root of what's causing infertility. And so honored to carry that legislation and to have the opportunity to educate some of my colleagues who their generation maybe didn't struggle with some of these hormonal imbalances that we do today. And that's a bigger conversation of some of why I think we struggle with them. But how do we approach this with a pro-family, pro-woman, really solution-based mindset? And that's what the Restore Act was. And so got to pass that this session, and it was a major win. So I hope to see other states adopt it, and hopefully even in DC.
Wow, I actually did not know about the Restore Act. That is amazing. I think that what excites me about that is, it's more of a modern approach to this whole pro-family issue. And you're identifying areas which right now there are gaps that need to be filled. I mean, if women are struggling with infertility, then family is like not possible, you know? And so I think also what's so special about that is it really shows the care of our movement as well. You know, I think people often try and make arguments against more conservative voices saying, oh, you know, they don't really care as much. Or, okay, if it's on like the pro life side, it's like they just want to force me to have a baby or whatever.
Yeah.
And actually, no. I mean, actually, on that argument, most resource centers, pretty much every single pregnancy resource center is ran by Christian conservatives. These are people giving away free services to help women. And I just love that. And the other bills that you talked about, it's just amazing. I'm sure this is so great for our viewers to just hear about like what is actually going on inside. Because I think sometimes we can feel a little disconnected or removed. We know like good things or even not good things are kind of happening, but to be able to hear directly from you is so amazing. And so that's what this podcast is all about. So it's been really great to hear what's going on in Arkansas. I would love it if you would share a little bit with the audience. And I will just preface this by saying that this podcast is strictly C3. We can't talk about advocacy, but what would you encourage, you know, the average person? How can they get involved? How can they support those representatives just like you who are standing up for biblical family values? What can they do to support and help?
Great question. And a quote I find myself saying a lot is when people ask, well, is there anything you regret about getting involved or running for office? Because it drastically changes your life. I went from being in ministry, in outreach ministry, where respectfully, I don't think I had any enemies. I don't think I don't think I had Facebook haters or, you know, was getting hate mail in from groups all around and people all around the state. The one thing that I regret about getting involved is that I didn't do it sooner and that I didn't get involved for other candidates before I ran for office, because knowing what it's like to have somebody in your community call you and say, Alyssa, I'm praying for you. What can I do to help? What can I do to support you in these efforts? That is such an encouragement to those who are putting their name out there. And so, you know, a couple of points, such a great question. I'm so glad you asked it. A couple of points. Number one is pray. If you are a Bible believing Christian in your state, please be praying for your elected officials. Let them know you're praying for them. Actually, before I started with doing some advocacy work at the Capitol, the only times I'd been to the Capitol were for prayer events before that moment, because I believed in the power of prayer, but I didn't know how to get involved. So first start with praying. You need a heart for these people, for the institution in itself, understanding it through a biblical worldview. FPA, Christians Engaged, has great resources for that. Pray and then reach out to those elected officials and then watch what's happening at the Capitol. You know, during a session like Arkansas, we had almost 2,000 bills introduced this last legislative session. I mean, it moves at a rapid pace. Pay attention and see, you know, do I agree with this? Do I have, you know, some commentary I would want to give? And I would say even showing up to give support is so important. There were times, even on my 10 Commandments bill, when it was in committee on the House side, I had a lot of pastors sign, and I want to say this, pastors in quotation, because they were not adhering to the biblical beliefs that you and I believe, Grace, sign up to come speak against my bills. And so sometimes you only hear, as elected officials, you only hear from the opposition. It's so important to get to hear those voices in your community who support the work that you're doing. So if you're listening and you support any work that your elected officials have done, write them a letter, reach out to them, show up. If you don't want to speak on the committee, at least stop them and say, hey, thank you for doing this. You know, you're representing my values, even if they're not in your exact district or your house seat, they are representing your values there. And so you want to add to that. And then I will say this, don't limit God. Pray about where you should get involved and how you should get involved, because he may be calling you to run for office. He may be calling you to get out there and get involved at a level that you have never done so before. And, you know, I quote this to people all the time and say, it's only scary because it's unknown. And I think when you know a known God, the unknown becomes less scary. And so the only scary part of putting my name out there is that I had no idea what it was like to campaign. I had no idea what was ahead of me, but I follow a known God. And so I could trust him with that. So trust him that if he's calling you to run for office, you can believe for victory. You can speak out the word of God. I said all the time when I was walking up a driveway before I knocked on their door, like, I am the head and not the tail. I am above and not beneath. I would quote scripture to myself. And really let that solidify my confidence through the whole journey. And I believe that he's continuing to raise up Christians to run for office, run for school board, state house, and to understand that we, like you said at the beginning, we fight from the side of victory. And there's still an uphill battle in many states. I know not everyone lives in a state like Arkansas. You may be listening from California, where it feels like a major uphill battle, but it's worth fighting for. And you want to get involved. You don't want to look back at the end of your life and say, man, I wish I would have been a part of what God was doing in America. You can get involved right now.
Amen. Amen. I love that so much, Alyssa. I think people are often quick to criticize and not so quick to share praise or encouragement. And as believers, we should be encouragers and praisers and lifters up of our fellow believers and workers in the field. And so I love that you talked about that. I think something so special about you, Alyssa, is your hope and your zeal and your positivity that you bring into all of this. And I think that's extremely inspiring. And so even what you shared about, just believing you're the head, not the tail, trusting this unknown future to a known God, it brings so much confidence and hope into this, which honestly, the joy of the Lord is our strength. We need that. So thank you for being such an incredible inspiration on that. Thank you so much for taking the time to have a conversation today. I really, really enjoyed it, and I'm sure that our audience will as well. So thank you again, Alyssa. To everyone listening, be sure to subscribe so you never miss a new episode. We release a new one every Wednesday. And we'll see you again soon. Thanks again, Alyssa.